Good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you're watching from. Today, we're taking on the topic of gender equality in our ongoing conversation of how public-private social sector or Trisector partnerships are prepared to facilitate progress toward the Sustainable Development Goals. As currently drafted, Goal 5 of the SDGs is to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Today, we're going to hear from 3 talented women who are all working in different ways to close the gap in gender equality. We hope that some of you joining us live today have some questions. You can enter those directly in the message line on Google Hangouts, or you can tweet to us at PYXERA Global or hashtag PYXERA Global 25. And I'd like to introduce my first guest. Brenda Pearson is the Practice Director for Governance, Equity, and Social Inclusion at Development and Training Services, or DTS. It's one of the leading organizations in the world focusing on the issue of gender-based violence, as well as other aspects of gender equality. So welcome, Brenda.
Thank you very much, Deirdre. Delighted to be here.
Well, Brenda, can you start with giving us a high-level description of the issue of gender-based violence, why this is a topic to which you personally and DTS is so committed?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. Well, I think the first sort of raising of this issue of gender-based violence that transitioned into U.S. government policy really derived from the conflicts of the early years in the 1990s in the Balkans, in Bosnia, in Rwanda, for example, when rape became used as a weapon of conflict. And I think that was really the first time it raised the level of gender-based violence in a conflict setting. And I had spent nearly 10 years of my career working in the former Yugoslavia and as well as in Rwanda. So I was able to observe up close the trauma that was associated with this, but also to work towards developing U.S. government policy to acknowledge that this was a very real and serious problem that needed to be addressed in a policy area. In 2012, Secretary Clinton initiated a strategy called gender-based violence, which is really a combination of an interagency approach, primarily in the foreign policy setting, with the U.S. State Department leading as well as USAID. Other agencies in government are also enacted. And what it really does is it takes a look at gender-based violence across all aspects of conflict, across healthcare access, across education. It gets into creating a policy-enabling environment so that the U.S. government has a strategic approach. Congress has enacted legislation that sets aside funding for programs, and we work on a couple different levels. The first level is to really make sure that domestic violence against women is enshrined in legislation across the country. 125 countries so far have passed legislation. 115 countries have also passed legislation clarifying the right to own property by women, which is often another way that women are excluded or disenfranchised. So through the legislative process, the policy enabling process, and then at the community level and at the individual level, we have program implementation that I and your other guests coming up later can talk about specific examples of how activities are implemented in order to reduce gender-based violence.
Great, thank you for that background. So when you look at those policy questions and where funding is going, in your experience, and you've been working in the space for many years now, what do you think is the most important area to put funding into? What is going to have the most impact on empowering women and girls and closing this gender equality gap?
Well, I have worked in the development field for, let's say, quite a few years. We don't need to be specific. And I would say, based on my observations firsthand, that the single most important investment is investing in girls' education. Girls' education is the first step to empowering young women to make decisions. It's often the way to enter into the workforce. It creates incentives for women to become educated. It also keeps them in the home longer. It postpones marriage. It postpones the first pregnancy. So by enabling girls to become educated, it helps a whole array of holistic support to women, and so that they're not having child brides, they're not having children before they're fully mature. And it has a economic effect as well, because it also improves the quality of the workforce. And so in many cases, education for girls has been an easier sell than in some other social cultural areas, because governments also see it as an economic advantage. And President Obama recently launched an initiative called Girls Learn. It's a $250 million initiative that's going to be administered primarily by State Department, USAID, and the Peace Corps as well. And it will be focusing on how we can adopt to contextual country-specific circumstances and still present a uniform agenda for girls' education.
Great. Well, so that's an example of how the funding can go directly to a gender issue. What are the ways in which there might have been other projects you've worked on where gender wasn't the primary focus, but where you're able to bring that in as an important aspect to a project that you're working on?
Two examples come to mind. In Colombia, we're administering 3 projects with funding from USAID. One of the projects is on land tenure. As you and your audience knows, it's often a driver of conflict because there isn't clear ownership involved in being able to say, okay, this property belongs to this person, this property belongs to the state, this property is undisputed. Within that context, we've also built out a small programmatic component that looks at the ability for women in indigenous populations to own property, how we can help them register in the cadastre, how we can help them with inheritance laws, because often that's another discriminating factor against women in indigenous or marginalized populations, is that they don't benefit from inheritance, so they're often left without any livelihood or ability to engage in the economic growth or social economic growth of their community as well as their family. In Afghanistan, another similar project is being administered by USAID in the sense that it's an agricultural development project. But what we've done is we've targeted that at least 15% of the beneficiaries within this Afghanistan agricultural growth project have to be women. So what that means is that we're involving women in the agricultural value chains, livestock, taking care of animal husbandry. We're also working with women that are primarily responsible for the shelling of pistachio nut dates, fruit collection, drying of fruits. And then the third area is on the high yield crops. So by using an economic growth through agriculture, we're able to insert the ability for women to gain recognition, training, to go from the very bare, working in the fields to actually being part of the value chain at the higher levels of production, trade, distribution, where the income generation is much higher than at the field level.
Right. So you've touched on different pieces of where the public sector can come into this equation now, where the private sector can come into the equation, the social sector, assumably as the implementers of some of the programming you're talking about. Do you have any examples of a really good public-private social sector partnership where all 3 parts of that triangle have come together, and how has that been more impactful, or has it been more impactful?
There's one example that I'll mention. I was with the United Nations World Food Program based in the headquarters. We ran programs in 14 countries to target vulnerable populations of women and children, and a lot of that was related to refugee camps as well in humanitarian assistance. And what we were able to do, because the delivery, the timeliness of food, the timeliness of nutrients for children is so critical in a humanitarian crisis, whether it's a tsunami or whether it's a conflict or a famine. And we brought in the private sector, the DHL, which is the Worldwide Delivery Service. We brought in other examples of how we get to point from A to point B with the private sector, because they really do have the distribution and the pipeline. So that was one example of bringing in the private sector to help us increase the efficiency and efficacy of the pipeline for distribution of food. Another couple examples that are related to that is that the private sector is often the catalyst for government to act quickly. And so by leveraging the partnership from the development community to the public sector to the private sector, each of those three partners have a different sense of timing. Development seems to take quite a long time when you have the long goal in mind. And then you have the public sector, which is the immediacy of wanting to deliver services. But the private sector is also looking at the growth projection. It's looking at the immediate bottle gaps that would be in the system. So I think that that's the creative way to try to resolve issues related to gender, but also related to community access to service and public access to service.
Great. What a perfect ending note for our conversation on Trisector Partnerships. Brenda, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank
really
you so
appreciate
much.
your thoughts. Okay, right now on your screens, you are probably seeing an advertisement for our borderless community. As many of you already know, this is our 25th anniversary here at PYXERA Global. And over the last 25 years, we've collaborated with tens of thousands of people in more than 90 countries around the world. The Borderless Initiative is our effort to reconnect with all of you, to bring you back into this community, to have an opportunity to learn from you and to reconnect you with one another. So please do go to our website and sign up for the Borderless community. We'd love to have you rejoin the PYXERA Global family. My next guest is Elizabeth Crowell. Elizabeth is CEO of Bpeace, which is a nonprofit that utilizes the skills of business volunteers to work with entrepreneurs in conflict-affected communities around the world. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you so much for having me. This is a topic near and dear to all of our missions and work, so it's great to be here.
Great. Well, why don't you go ahead and start by giving us a better understanding of the kinds of work that Bpeace undertakes and how it ties into this question of gender equality.
Sure. So Bpeace believes that the path to peace is lined with jobs. We're a network of nearly 400 business volunteers who volunteer their time and expertise to help high potential entrepreneurs in conflict-affected countries, just as you said. So right now we're working in Afghanistan, El Salvador, and Guatemala. And our model is to surround these high potential entrepreneurs with customized premium pro bono consulting services. And in that way, we can really zero in, target how we can help them scale their businesses, grow their payrolls, create more jobs, and ultimately create opportunity and hope in their communities. And so we really work like a matchmaking service. And at the end of the day, we're creating jobs because we believe more jobs means less violence. And just to give you an example of how we work, I want to tell you about an entrepreneur we have in Afghanistan. She's truly extraordinary. Her name is Zarguna. And we have a very high-touch tailored approach. So we work with our entrepreneurs anywhere from 18 months to 3 years. So we really get to know their businesses and get to know them. And we can work with them in a very generalized sense, so help them with marketing or budgeting or financial analysis, employee engagement. And then many times we also work with them in a highly specialized format. So we look at something like, increasing productivity for fresh produce, or right now we're looking for a veneer expert for a furniture manufacturer we're working with. But in terms of Zarguna, when she came into our program, she had one beauty salon and she was employing 9 women. And through our program, she decided that she really wanted to not only expand her beauty salons, but also to open fitness centers. So we paired her with a number of experts, 2 of whom were the person who runs Nyack Fitness, which is a fitness studio here in New York, and then also with a local filmmaker. And the 3 of them together teamed up and made these wonderful fitness training videos, which lo and behold had made her fitness center the most popular in Mazar, which is where she's located. So this is an example of like how tailored we can be for our clients. And the results are really astounding. So now she's been with us about 3 years. Now she has 4 salons, 2 fitness studios, and she's employing 65 women. So it's a great success story.
Well, we just got a great question in over Twitter, so it ties in nicely to what you just said. You talked about investment in women-owned businesses and that this business now is employing 65 women. The question we got from Twitter is, in focusing on women and girls, do we leave men behind, thus creating more conflict? Love to hear your thoughts on that, Elizabeth.
Yeah, it's a really great question because actually Bpeace was founded about 13 years ago when we began work in Afghanistan solely with women. And over the course of our work and through support, we have support from the State Department, for instance. They really encouraged us to bring men into the equation too. And so now we actually support both men and women led businesses. We have a bias for women. So right now about 65% of our portfolio is women-led businesses, but it's absolutely true. You have to approach it from a holistic sense. You can't just focus on one piece and think everything will work out. You really have to think about the men too.
Okay, so we've got women and men in the mix, but you're focused pretty exclusively on small and medium enterprises. Why small and medium enterprises? Why is that so important in the markets where you're working?
Yeah, so any organization really needs to have a clear focus, and we really saw an opportunity to work with the small and medium-sized businesses, with the SMEs. And the value that we saw there was that if we can support and surround this high potential entrepreneur who's running not a startup but a business that has momentum, it's like a lever, right? We help them, and then they can lift up a lot of people. So it has a very quick multiplier effect. And just to give you an example of that, we have a great business, a multi-generational business in El Salvador, and their business is they manufacture spices and spice mixes. And they started working with us, and they really wanted to expand their customer base, and they found an incredible opportunity. What they do is they've created it's really a part cooking school, part micro entrepreneurial incubator, and they train women to use their spices to prepare quick service foods like sausages and chicken that they can sell right from their homes. So this trade that these women now have provides supplemental income that really has a huge impact on their families. So in terms of working with the small and medium-sized businesses, you can it's a multiplier effect. You can really move the needle in communities when you focus on the businesses that have momentum and that can reach into their communities like that.
Let's talk about moving that needle. How do you measure that the needle's actually been moved? What are the things that you're tracking when you work with these businesses, and what do you track in the community beyond the business success?
Sure. So we do a lot of measurement, and I would say, we have a host of indicators, what I like to think of as both direct and indirect. So, some of the direct KPIs that we measure are revenue growth, profit margin increase, job growth, things like that are kind of all about the business. But then we also look at how does the job created impact the family behind that job? And so in that way, we kind of look in a little bit more into the community that's around these businesses. And, in the case of Sabor Amigo, the business I just mentioned from El Salvador, we also look at the customers, because here in that case, it's not only the business and the employees, but the customers who are really benefiting from the impact of the growth of this business. So, this year alone, 13,000 Afghans, Salvadorans, and Guatemalans have benefited from our work of supporting 65 entrepreneurs in those markets.
Right. And can you tell us a little bit about how do you prepare your volunteers to go out to work in these very difficult environments and to understand the challenges that are going to be facing businesses in somewhere like Salvador or Afghanistan?
No, it's a good question. I mean, I'm really proud of the job growth that we get from our businesses. Sometimes usually within the first year they see a 15% increase in their payrolls, which is really incredible given that most of these markets are seeing less than a 4% increase in GPD. So, and with the endemic violence, it's difficult. I would say that the Bpeace community is self-selecting. So, the volunteers who are really confident about their skills, they are ready to share them, and they a lot of times it's what I call the Bpeace magic. At the end of engagement, I can't tell who's happier, the client or the volunteer. And so, in terms of preparing them, there's not as much work. It's really finding the right fit. And that's where we spend most of our time, sort of matchmaking to find exactly the kind of expertise that is going to help these businesses scale and generate jobs and hope.
Okay, and my last question for you as we wrap up this part of our interview is going back to this theme of Trisector partnerships, so public-private social sector partnership. Can you talk a little bit about how that ties into your work at Bpeace and what good examples you've seen of how that kind of partnership works well?
Sure, sure. I mean, we depend on partnerships. That's our whole model of making our organization work. So right now we have support from the State Department, so that's the government piece. We obviously are tapping our huge network from the private sector to get the experts to be able to help our entrepreneurs. And when we are recruiting for the entrepreneurs themselves, you know, to find the 20 or 30 companies that are really kind of the shining stars, you have to cast a wide net. And so we depend on, you know, our partnerships with universities and other organizations on the ground in the countries where we work. So all these pieces coming together, it's critical.
Well, great. Elizabeth, thank you so much for taking the time today and sharing the stories of Bpeace.
Thank you, Deirdre.
So while we shift gears here, I want to just remind everyone that our Global Engagement Forum is going to be held on November 10th and 11th here in Washington, D.C., along with a worldwide broadcast on November 12th. So please do save those dates. As you've already captured from the previous two conversations, at PYXERA Global, we believe that the world's most pressing issues are only going to be solved if we are able to bring together the public, private, and social sectors. And the more that we have opportunity to sit down and to dialogue about what that really means in practice, the better we're going to get at progressing toward the Sustainable Development Goals and just moving the needle on the world's most pressing challenges. So please do join us on the 10th to 12th of November, and we look forward to seeing you here in Washington and seeing you at our virtual events between now and then. Okay. My third guest and good friend Maggie DeLorme is a program manager here at PYXERA Global, where among other things she designs and manages integrated community development programs, one of which is a program called JIVA, the Joint Initiative for Village Advancement in rural Rajasthan, India. And I'm going to be unhumble enough at this moment to mention that the JIVA project was just recognized this week by CECP. It received the Director's Award for partnership with John Deere, as well as with our local NGO, Jatan, the villagers in the 3 villages we're working with in Rajasthan. And it was recognized for leadership, for measurement, and for innovation. So congratulations again, Maggie, on that achievement, you and the rest of the team.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Maggie, why don't you start and give us a brief overview of JIVA? Tell us what
Sure.
the program's about and also how gender issues come into the JIVA program.
Sure. So JIVA, which stands for the Joint Initiative for Village Advancement, works in 3 rural villages in Rajasthan, India, and the primary focus areas are agriculture, education, and infrastructure. So it might seem a bit odd to be sitting here in a gender equality webcast, but actually, gender issues come into play every day in project implementation. It's really impossible to ignore their omnipresence in everyday life, especially in rural development, and in areas where gender inequality is sort of widespread. So for agriculture and income security, you know, one thing that we notice along the way is as we're trying to bolster productivity and increase profits, et cetera, there's a big gender gap there with farmers. You know, the male farmers are in charge of what gets planted and where it gets sold at the end, but everything in between, as far as all the hard manual work, is done by women. And so as we were designing our programs, we really had to take into account the gender issues at play, the different roles, the different responsibilities, and it goes the same for education and infrastructure as well.
One thing you said to me once about this program was that what was important was understanding that a woman farmer is not just a farmer. Can you talk a little bit about that and the issues that come into play?
Yeah, so I think the JIVA approach is to look at the community system holistically and to look at the different roles in which community members play. So a farmer is not just a farmer, like you said. She's also a mother. She's also a community member. She's also a consumer at the local store. And with these types of engagements, when you're trying to affect systemic change, you can't target your interventions or your activities in silos. You have to recognize that people wear many different hats and they play many different roles, and a lot of times those roles can be competing. For example, in education, you know, we're trying to get children back in school and staying in school, but that also, the effect of that is also taking away, you know, free on-farm labor, or taking away babysitters for the younger children. So you have to look at the whole system and delve deeper into what are the challenges, what are the different roles that people are playing, and what are the effects of the types of activities and interventions you're trying to implement.
So 2 years into the implementation of this program, what evidence do you have that it's having a positive effect on women and girls in the communities?
Absolutely. So we've actually had really great results in the first year or two of the project. One of the things that we noticed in the baseline study from the get-go was that I believe 75% of the village population hadn't studied beyond fifth grade. And so if you stop there, initially your reaction is to, okay, we need to work with primary education and try to get kids more engaged at the primary school level. But when you delve a little bit deeper and you ask some questions about why that is, and is it boys, is it girls, and what are the reasons for that, you realize that there's a big gender gap there, that girls are dropping out at 5th class, but especially when they hit puberty level. And what are the reasons for that? There's a big child marriage reason at play as well. And so some of the results that we've seen due to our activities that we're doing to try and tackle some of those issues is that we have over 80% of dropouts back in school, and predominantly girls are back in school now. 100% of those dropouts, or left-outs as they're called if they've never attended school, are now in our after-school program. We have female farmers with our agriculture trainings coming and learning, whereas in the beginning it was just men, and now it's women as well, and they're going back to school on the off hours, that because we're sort of decreasing the amount of time that they have to be on the farm, they spend the time that they're not on the farm to go back to school or to help learn and literacy training, etc. So those are some really great results we've seen.
So it sounds like the child marriage issue, that can be a very charged issue. That's one that the GEVA program doesn't take on directly, but takes on indirectly by creating other opportunities. Are there other cultural issues, cultural norms that create some challenges, but that GEVA is addressing either directly or indirectly to change behaviors?
Yeah. So for the education side, over 55% of student absenteeism is due to children needing to provide extra labor on the farm or to help with household chores, etc. And so the after-school program addresses that by providing schooling in after-school hours. So recognizing that we may not be able to change the way in which a culture is working and has worked for generations, we provide a complement to it. And getting kids engaged in school, and then slowly but surely starting to get parents more involved in formal schooling. So that's one, providing school after hours. Also, girls tend to have to take care of their younger siblings. And so what we realized after the first year was we needed to provide a space for those younger siblings in our after-school program so that the girls could come and they could bring their younger siblings but also learn while they were there.
Great. And as each of the other interviews ended with this idea of Trisector partnership, talk about the partnerships that are involved in GEVA and how they've been critical to the success of the program today.
Sure, absolutely. So the project is funded by the John Deere Foundation, and we also partner with the local NGO, Jetin, and the villagers themselves. And I think this participatory approach, which is really focused on partnerships and everybody coming to the table and leveraging the different resources and expertise, has been huge for the project's success thus far. We've been committed to a robust monitoring and evaluation system that, we came in, we asked questions in the beginning, we designed the program accordingly, but we didn't stop there, and we continue to ask questions, and we continue to partner with the villagers to make sure that the approach is authentic and contextualized and makes sense for them. At the end of the day, that's the holy grail, as I think you once said, for development. And actually at the CECP event yesterday, I won't take credit for the quote, but it was a great quote from Shannon Schuler from PwC. She said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's so true. The best laid plans, it never works out as you think it does when you get there. And so, especially with the GEVA program, having partners so committed to a participatory approach, to being flexible and adjusting along the way, has been critical for the project and its success thus far.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Maggie, and thanks everyone for joining us
Thank
today. We
you.
look forward to seeing you at the next webcast.